So we've got Georgia Bondy, founder and CEO of WellAdapt, Jessica Hobbis, strategy and partnerships manager at ScreenMe, and Estella Edwards, founder of Rise Foundation. I'm going to go over this side now. Thank you. Hello. Oh, yeah. Switching it up. Don't want to be in the same seat for all the pictures. Okay, let's do introductions if you go this way. Is it Matt? You've got mine. Here you go.
Hello.
You go.
Oh, hello. So I'm Georgia. I am the founder and CEO of WellAdapt. And WellAdapt is a social enterprise that tries to kind of change up the chronic illness journey. A lot of the time, people like myself, when you're diagnosed with something, you're kind of left alone. You might have a doctor's appointment in a year's time, expecting support and getting none. So we kind of aim to change that, to provide community support and knowledge on how to live with chronic illness. So that's me.
Very good morning, good morning, afternoon. So I'm Estella Edwards, and I guess over 30 years over 30 years that I've always advocated for women. I've been in different leadership roles. I've also specialised with young people through the Future Melting Pot, but more post-COVID, Rise Foundation. So it's about advocating for women of colour and having a pipeline to enable young people also to navigate the leadership terrain. Why do I do that? Because of my personal experience. Why am I doing it? Because it's taken me this time to be visible. I'm also a podcast host, so utilise the platform certainly to elevate women.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Jess. I'm from ScreenMe, and we're really passionate about closing the gender health gap and specifically focusing on intimate health. So we do this through a variety of ways, including raising awareness, testing, education, support, care, just so that we can really create a safe space for people that need it.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you. I feel like intersectionality is definitely very important. We focus about safe with women, but then you have to focus on different things that come into that, not just women standing alone. So what specific challenges would you say women with disabilities face in their daily lives, and how can we ensure that the support services and resources are accessible to them? Can you give some examples?
Sure. So I think there's a really big intersection with being a woman and being disabled, because I think we have a lot of prejudice along the lines of disabled people are not useful, that they're useless, that they're a burden. But we also have this horrible stereotype about women where they're less smart, less capable. So when you put those two things together, you get a situation where a lot of disabled women are treated in the workplace and in other environments like we are extra incapable of absolutely everything. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that we change that is things like this, beautiful representation, right? Where you have disabled women in positions of power just existing publicly can really help with breaking that stereotype and stopping that being the default assumption.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that in the public and private sector, there is a low percentage of women within health, within education, within vocational training. So there are a lot of challenges in terms of that engagement and that access.
Yeah, I completely agree with both points there. And I think particularly from a health perspective, I think understanding awareness and diagnosis is really important. Yeah. I mean, for example, endometriosis is a condition that can really affect and be debilitating, and that takes on average 8 years to be diagnosed. So I think creating a system that understands people that come with this and raises awareness so that they know. I mean, 1 in 9 people have endometriosis, 1 in 9 women. And I think it's really important that we educate people, including practitioners and the general public, so that they know what to look out for and also what they can do to manage.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. In that, take women that do have disabilities, how do we improve access and education and training opportunities so that they can enhance their skills and employability? For example, like any unconscious bias, or you put on there like disabilities, and people might think that you're less capable of doing your job. How do we improve access to those education opportunities, but then also enable that they're still being hired for the positions that they're very capable of doing?
I think money solves a lot of these problems. Having scholarships specifically for Black women in universities, particularly in fields where there's really, really poor representation. For example, in academia, sort of PhD level above, the number of Black women is ridiculously small. So just having a pot of money there to help women who are disabled get into those fields, I think is really important. I think money's a good place to start.
I was looking at the Women Health Alliance, and they have exemplar practice because they had a collaborative approach with policy, advocacy groups and health professionals. And so through their collaborative initiative that they looked at education and training, they looked at community engagement, they looked at policy, and through those processes that they were able to increase the awareness and the uptake of specific access issues. So I think that it's also a great example of how collaboration and how driving forward change.
Yeah,
I think those two are kind of quite a main points, but I think just to add on top of that, I think setting it as standard practice is really important, and because not everyone has the energy or wants to fight for these things, particularly in the workplace. And I think to set that as a standard policy, and as you mentioned, Estella, about that being the exemplar practice through a collaborative approach and through funding, of course, I think that's really important because, not everyone wants to fight that battle every single day. And I think it's up to us to really set that precedent and really make that a priority.
I think that's really key, Jess, with what you're saying. And what advice would you say you'd give to, say, women out there that do have potentially disabilities or hidden disabilities that maybe don't fully affect them, but potentially don't want to share because they feel like it's going to impact their work, or they don't want to share because they feel like it's a burden? What would you, any of you, say to women that are kind of going through that?
Yeah, it's obviously a really difficult one because I think that it really depends on the person, but I think definitely seeking other people and community groups that share your experience is a great way to start. I mean, there's great people out there, including those on the panel with me today, and I think there's great resources out there for people, and there's different ways in which you can really access different opportunities. And I think seeking advice and help from other communities who can also be that voice for you when you may not want to be that voice can be really important, specifically if you're struggling with that. And it can definitely be an isolating experience. So I think that can be really important.
Yeah, I agree. I particularly agree with the point about community, because I think a lot of the time, if you're going through something as a disabled woman, there's a disabled woman who's already been through it. And sometimes it can feel really isolating and like you're the only one in the world. But if you try to remember that you're not, usually you can find someone. They might not be a direct contact, but you'll probably know someone who knows someone in the same sector, maybe even in the same workplace. So I think if you can find someone who perhaps chose to disclose to your workplace or didn't choose, and you can talk it through with them, I think that's a really good place to start.
What measures do you think can be taken to ensure that healthcare services are inclusive and responsive to the unique different healthcare needs of women with disabilities?
So I think one of the things that I have noticed about the healthcare system is that it directly precludes disabled people in general from becoming healthcare workers. If, for example, you have a disability that stops you from being able to give CPR, you literally aren't allowed in medical school in the UK. You have to be able to perform CPR. So if you have, for example, arm weakness, you can't even become a doctor. So we have a medical system that means there aren't disabled people working as doctors for the most part, which means that we have very little representation in the field. We have mostly non-disabled people working in the NHS, which, you know, I think as everybody knows in this room, when you don't have any representation, you don't have anybody representing your views, your needs, your experience. And I think it's a travesty, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. Jess, what do you think?
Yeah, completely agreed with that. I think that's really important. And I think we also mentioned funding as well was really important. I know 2.5% of research money is given to reproductive women's health. And I think that we obviously need more funding in the area so that we can create what needs to be created in order to actually service women and those with disabilities. And I also think creating those safe spaces, as we mentioned before, with communities where people can feel heard and also feel safe. Because I think a lot of the time disability and good health can be portrayed as mutually exclusive, but that's completely not the case. And I think we should really utilise that and recognise that people are different and tailor our services according to that, not just have them based on the white male body, for example. I think it's about recognising difference and really creating space for that and fostering different approaches.
Yeah, it's really good that you touched on that, actually, because I think when I was just doing research, I like to educate myself every now and then. The white male body is so real in that, like, medicine and all the stuff we learned in school in science, it's all related towards a white male body. So kind of how interesting do you feel like that is in terms of, like, when it comes now to disabilities and when it comes now to healthcare and getting the care needed for that, when all the science kind of out there is kind of tailored not towards, say, women of colour, or etc.?
Yeah, I think it makes a massive difference. Even with, I used to, in my uni days, I would do clinical trials because they paid you like $3,000 to stay in a hospital for a couple of weeks, and I was skint, so I did it. But they precluded people who have periods. They were like, oh, you either have to be on some kind of contraception that means you don't have a period, or you have to be postmenopausal, because periods mess with the data. As if people who take the drugs aren't going to have periods. And this was, I'm not that old. Like, this wasn't long ago. This still happens constantly. So I think it just means that, like, most drugs have not been tested on people who are on their period. Most drugs have not been tested in people who have different health conditions. You have to be healthy to do these clinical trials, or they like you to have only that specific health condition so that the data is not, messed up. And it just means that there are side effects, there are risks for people's bodies with periods, people with chronic illness that we don't know about, that doctors like to brush off to say, oh no, that's not in the data I got, so it can't exist. So it's dangerous. It's dangerous and it's depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with that. And unfortunately, I mean, there's loads of books out there saying how the world is tailored for the white male body. But as women living in it, I think as a strategy looking forward, just even in the short term, I think just perhaps listening to your body, and we know when something doesn't feel right and when something does feel right. And I'm not saying you have to be you're your own doctor, of course not. I think always seek professional help, but I think just that case of listening to your own body, and again the community aspect, when you see other people that are like you or going through similar experiences, I think that can be really important just in terms of strategies looking forward in the short term, just so it doesn't feel too depressing with it, because I think unfortunately it's going to take a while to change. I mean, there's more and more research coming out, and I know there's a lot more databases that are looking at women, but I think it's obviously something that we're going to struggle with. So I think that as just a short-term strategy or tip.
Yeah, I think addition to that there could be what either centres or health centres could do is that affirmative action, where there's actually targets that are set that enable people to look at the access. In terms of affirmative action, it's where you are positively putting measures in place for a specific group or for females with specific disability.
Touching on the points that you've had, I'm just thinking about the amount of data needed for this topic, in terms of what you're saying with when they're doing trials and they don't want things to mess up. Like how, I'm not sure if you guys can speak into that, because I guess it's data analytics questions, but it relates that in disabilities, there's a lot of trials that need to go, and there's loads of things that come up that potentially we might not know in the short term or in the long term. So like how in this sector are people planning for the kind of unknown side of things with like the data that they have, and the data, how the data is going to be able to use things like closing this gender disability gap? That makes sense.
I think it does. Just to check, the question is like, what's being done?
Yeah, to like how the data, there's so much data out there, right? So like how are they utilizing that to make sure that they're coming up with the right solution and not just a solution that might not work?
I would say for the most part they're not, which is sad.
Yeah.
There's at the moment people are trying to campaign around this, but periods still are seen as a problem in clinical trials. In some ways I get why. So my background is actually chemistry. So the clinical trial process is fairly familiar to me, and it's a long, expensive process. It can take 20 years from conception of a drug to get to the point where it's allowed out into prescriptions. So it is a long and expensive process, but as we've said, there needs to be affirmative action anyway. It just doesn't matter. Like if we need 25 years so that it's safe for women to use as well, so that it's safe for disabled women to use as well, then we should take 25 years. I don't know why we're shaving off time. But yes, just to answer your question, I'm not aware of anybody doing anything particularly useful in this. I don't know about the rest of the panel.
Well, okay. With some of my research, certainly that the World Bank was reporting, but it was more every minute there are 30 women who are seriously injured or disabled during labour. And when you look at, there's 15 to 50 million who go unnoticed. And when we're looking at the tapestry of challenges, so not any one particular condition, so those were some of the statistics or the data. So with what you're talking about, that I haven't seen any aligned to that particular question.
Yeah, I think just to kind of quickly add on to that, I think a lot of the data, unfortunately, in its nature, data is taken and it excludes these minorities or smaller groups. And I think that can be the danger of using wide data sets. So I think sometimes maybe it's not always the way forward, but sometimes it is. I know there's some work that's being done to create more data sets on women and disabled women. But I think, again, as I kind of mentioned before and have kind of banged on about, maybe the aspect of community and creating things that are not just data driven is actually a way forward, and I think can be really useful.
What are some of your other opinions, if we're talking about things that aren't there yet? What would you like to see, like if you had all the money in the world and all the power in the world, that you'd want to see to be able to do things like close this gap, in your opinion? I'm just interested based off the things that you've said. Go on.
I think certainly for me, the community engagement, which also includes families, the media, and other platforms where you are raising awareness, and because it's always through education also, and I think that would be a key aspect going forward, so that there's that understanding and less of that stigma.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely agreed. I think education, training and awareness would really be the best way forward, just because particularly with regards to health or disability or any aspect of your well-being, I think it's really important to be able to recognise something, flag it, and if you then know the processes, for example, or you know the ability to diagnose things, as I mentioned before as well, I think that's a really key step forward with preventative health and just finding the right people, the right support, the right care, because there is the information out there. I know we've said that there's not as much as we would like information out there in research, but there is information out there and there is help out there. And there are people that have gone through similar things, and it shouldn't take 8 years for you to be diagnosed with something that you've had for a long time. I don't think that's unacceptable. So I think educating people on, for example, we do a lot of work in intimate health, so educating people on what does a healthy period look like? What's healthy discharge look like? Can we even say the word vagina without cringing? These taboo subjects, I think, are really important and really key going forward with regards to our health and, the health of not just women, but the rest of society. I mean, we construct, women are primary healthcare givers in society, and I think it's so important to create a structure whereby people feel empowered with the education that they have about their own bodies.
Yeah, wow.
I love what both of you have said. I agree. I completely agree. I think particularly around education, like I look at the way we think about disability in particular in the education system, and it's not really there. Like in biology, we learn about illnesses, like it's a thing to fix, but you don't really learn about, okay, but there's plenty out there we can't fix. So what does that life look like? Probably everybody in this room at some point will have some kind of disability at some age. So why are we not learning about that? Why are we not talking about that at all, despite the fact that it's going to be part of most humans' experience? And I think it's in part fear. People are scared of becoming disabled, so they don't want to talk about it. And I think if we started talking about it with kids from day dot, there would be less fear. It would be an open conversation, just like the word vagina. Why so much fear about vagina? Literally, there's so many vaginas. I don't understand. But yes, I think if we can start really young, just talking about these things, and if we had all of the money, shoving people who are women, who are disabled in positions of power across the healthcare system, across the media, that would be great. That wonderful.
Leads very nicely onto my question in terms of how do we increase that representation? So there's leadership positions and senior positions for women with disabilities within, so they can make the decision-making processes that are going to affect them, and that they can have the advocacy. If you're saying that you can't be a doctor, you can't do certain things if you've got certain disabilities, then if we have those type of people in the leadership positions, they'll be able to kind of tell them what they need. But how do we get that representation in the first place, in your opinion?
I think there's a few ways. I think one of the biggest ways I was thinking about is hiring from within. Like I hear from a lot of managers and leaders like, oh, I wanted to hire someone diverse, but they weren't qualified enough. So hire from within, train your people. I'm sure there are some really, really badass disabled women in your company who, if you trained them, could do the job that was higher up. So I think a lot of focus is on recruitment drive and finding people from the outside. But if you look within, I'm sure you can find some people that you could train and do it that way.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree, and I think that the term leadership, that maybe that could be almost like reframed, because enabling someone to navigate to the next level. So I guess the way in which they're looking at what roles people are in and making a way. Also, a voice, being able to genuinely give people a voice, and other people in the workforce being able to deliver in an inclusive way, but in a way that's really enabling others. And they take responsibility as well for doing some of their own research so that they have that understanding and that future leadership.
Yeah, completely agreed with both points. And I think just to add on your point there, I think redefining what we actually mean by the term leadership as well, I think is really important. I think it's not good enough to really just assume that leadership is this big white male shouting at you. You've got to be really like strict and shouting and strong, as so to speak. I think there's real value in leadership that takes into consideration relationships and really is empathetic. And that's a different way of viewing leadership, but also a really valuable way of viewing leadership. So I think adding value to that kind of leadership is really important, just because it's just beyond the traditional way of doing it. And I think it's something that can really open up access. And then also I think flexibility with regards to working is really important. I think giving people the time and space that they need to work in the way that best fits them. It doesn't make sense that everyone can sit in a chair for a 9-to-5 job. They may work better in the morning. They may need a break in the middle. They may have to do particular things in the day. They may not be able to sit for the whole day. They may need to work from home on particular days, for example, or go to different appointments or have a different structure. I don't think it makes sense. I mean, it makes zero sense that everyone has to sit at a desk 9 to 5 every single day, when that's not the most productive way for, I think, most people to work. People like to mix it up. People like to do different things. Different things work for different people. So I think that's a really important way to kind of allow people to access those leadership positions and just the workforce in general.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I just like to, we spoke about on disabilities and we spoke a lot about physical health. I wanted to pivot a bit about on mental health as well, and how important that is, and understanding that it's real, and even just like having a conversation and asking like, are you okay? And we've got like mental health awareness month, international like men's mental health and women's as well, but like it's such a huge thing. I think over the last decade or so, even the last 2 decades, people are actually realizing that mental health is real, and it's not just just having a bad day. Like there's actually things there, and to actually discuss it and it not be taboo. So in your opinion, like how do we continue those conversations, especially in like the work environment?
I think one of the important things is I see a lot of virtue signaling in workplaces about mental health. A lot of leaders saying like, of course, like take a mental health day. But at the end of the day, if somebody actually has a long-term problem that requires them to be off work or need any real adjustments, they don't want to give them. It's like, feel free to cry on your day off. So I think people need to practice what they preach. I think that's the first step that has to be taken, because people aren't going to disclose if they think that they're not allowed to be ill in working hours.
I also think that the pressures of life and of work, that often sometimes if there is not a safe space, people are not going to tell you that they are not okay. But they also ought to be those, so I know in our environments that we have those who are mental health or well-being individuals that are also taking that time to have those conversations. And I think it's about that awareness as well, ensuring that people are open to and feel okay to have those conversations, rather than you hearing stories where people have harmed themselves. So I think it's always about the awareness. It's about that space and making people feel safe to do so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's that creation of a safe space is really important. And I think it then empowers people to have their own voice and really gives them that voice as and when they need to or want to. I think that's really important. It can feel, particularly with mental health, it can feel really isolating. And I think that then fostering an inclusive environment where people feel supported, safe, trained, they feel wanted, they feel like they're part of the team, they don't feel that they've just been kind of added in. I think it's really important to create that space that's really inclusive, and then that will really foster that kind of environment where people feel like they can come to the team with their issues and come to the team with their concerns.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you very much for all of you. A round of applause to our panel for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.